Hi everyone. Tonight, we begin by stepping into the echoing stone corridors of a medieval castle. Torches flicker along the walls, and you can almost hear the faint whistle of wind slipping through cracks in the heavy wooden doors. It's the kind of place that feels romantic when you visit as a tourist. But if you actually had to live here, especially on a winter night, you would likely regret it within the first hour. The truth is straightforward. Castles were cold. If you had to sleep inside one without central heating, insulated windows, or even a proper mattress by modern standards, you would quickly realize that your greatest enemy wasn't rival knights. It was the temperature. You probably wouldn't last comfortably, not without a few practical adjustments. Before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy this content. And if you're listening right now, share your location and local time in the comments. I always appreciate seeing where viewers are tuning in from. Now, lower the lights, slow your breathing, and imagine yourself preparing for bed in a medieval stronghold. You walk across the flagstone floor of a great chamber, your boots scraping against stone worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The cold presses against your skin even though you're fully dressed. Stone walls don't just resist warmth, they absorb it. Historians often describe castles as impressive defensive structures, but rarely as comfortable homes. Here's the direct reality. The same thick walls that could withstand a battering ram also trapped cold air like a massive refrigerator. Once the sun set, the indoor temperature dropped almost as quickly as it did outside. You would see your breath forming small clouds in front of you. The air feels heavy, damp, and uninviting. Castles were built to keep enemies out, not to keep warmth in. Architects focused on moats, drawbridges, and arrow slits. Insulation was not a priority. It's also worth remembering that many castles in Northern Europe were deliberately built on exposed hills. From a military perspective, this made sense. You could spot approaching forces from a distance, and the slopes provided a defensive edge. But for someone trying to sleep, it was a disadvantage. Wind swept across every surface and pushed icy drafts through gaps in shutters and beneath doors. It's hard to imagine a worse sleeping environment. You might assume the fireplaces solved the problem. In reality, they offered limited relief. Even a strong fire in the great hall warmed only the area close to the flames. The farther you moved away, the colder it became. By the time you reached your bedchamber, the air could feel closer to that of a cellar than a living space. There are records from the late medieval period describing frost forming inside castle bedrooms. Some travelers mentioned waking to find ice on bed curtains or wash basins frozen solid. Chroniclers often treated this as ordinary, barely worth detailed comment. If your chamber didn't develop a thin layer of frost in January, you were unusual. Despite these conditions, people survived. They developed practical methods to prevent themselves from freezing during the night. Much of this involved routine. As evening approached, households followed established patterns designed to preserve whatever heat they could. Although a castle might be large, the goal was to reduce the active living space after dark. Fires were carefully managed, beds were enclosed with curtains, clothing was layered heavily, and everyone hoped the drafts would not be severe. When you enter a medieval bedchamber, the bed stands high above the floor. This wasn't decorative, it was functional. Cold air settles near the ground, so elevation offered some advantage. Even so, stone radiated chill upward, and you would feel it as soon as you lay down. Historians still debate whether castles became significantly more comfortable over time or whether later stories exaggerated the comfort of noble life. Some argue that tapestries and heavy draperies genuinely improved warmth. Others believe that no amount of fabric could overcome the persistent cold. The most balanced view suggests that conditions improved somewhat, but never reached what we would call true comfort. You lie back in this imagined bed. The wooden frame creaks, and straw-filled bedding shifts beneath you. Outside, wind moves across the battlements. A small oil lamp flickers near the bedside, its light unsteady. Your toes begin to ache from the cold, even though you remain in layered clothing. Then the sounds of the castle settle in. The distant echo of boots on stone as a guard changes watch. The creak of rafters stiffened by frost. A dog barking faintly in the courtyard, its sound softened by thick walls. Perhaps the subtle drip of water freezing nearby. None of it makes you warmer. It simply reinforces how harsh the outside world is. It's easy to imagine nobles resting comfortably while peasants struggled in small cottages. However, the situation was sometimes reversed. Peasant homes, built of wood and daub, could retain heat from a central hearth more efficiently than the vast chambers of a stone keep. A single fire in a compact hut might warm an entire family adequately. Meanwhile, a noble in a castle could shiver in a space so large that even multiple fireplaces made little difference. This contrast was noted at the time. Surviving letters from clerics and visiting nobles mention the challenge of sleeping well in castles during winter. They describe the beds as impressive but the nights as severe. Some advise travelers to bring extra cloaks, not as decoration, but as a necessity. As you continue imagining yourself there, you begin to recognize the level of planning required just to rest. You wouldn't simply lie under one blanket and hope for warmth. You would layer textiles, add furs, close bed curtains tightly, and sometimes share the bed with others, people or animals, to conserve body heat. Each measure aimed to create a small zone of warmth within an environment shaped by both nature and architecture to remain cold. This perspective changes how you view medieval life. These individuals were not only warriors, nobles, monks, or maidens. They were practical survivors. Every night required preparation, every winter demanded resilience, and sleep, something we consider effortless, had to be carefully arranged through habits passed down over generations. You would value every small source of warmth, the presence of a dog at your feet, heated stones placed near your bedding, the minor success of waking without frost on your beard. These practical comforts would leave a stronger impression than feasts or hunts. Survival itself was significant. So tonight, as you lie in your modern bed with central heating quietly running, take a moment to consider those who once tried to sleep in stone chambers. Their nights were long and cold, their mornings difficult, and yet they endured. They found ways to rest in places that offered little natural comfort. That same ingenuity is what we'll keep examining step by step, method by method, as this account guides you further into the medieval night. You enter the Great Hall now, the central core of any medieval castle. If the bedchamber felt like a vault of stone and draughts, this space at least carries signs of warmth. Long trestle tables stretch across the floor, their wooden tops worn smooth by years of elbows and tankards. The air carries the scent of roasted meat, spilled ale, damp wool, and smoke that never quite leaves the rafters. The fire in the main hearth burns brightly, a bold square of orange heat pushing back the winter darkness. This was the area where the castle felt most active after sunset. People gathered here not only to eat, but to take in as much warmth as possible before returning to their freezing rooms. Servants move quickly, carrying trenchers of bread, jugs of ale, and large bowls of steaming pottage. Dogs wander beneath the tables, tails moving eagerly, waiting for scraps. The hall grows loud, almost raucous, filled with laughter, songs, and the sharp clatter of knives on plates. For a short time, you forget that outside, wind sweeps across the battlements and frost forms along the windows. The simple truth is this: the Great Hall was usually the only place in a castle where heating worked to any real degree. A massive open hearth stood at the center or one end of the room, and during winter it was fed constantly. Logs, sometimes whole trunks, were dragged in to keep the flames alive. If you held status, you secured a seat nearby, enjoying the steady glow, while servants and others without privilege remained at the edges, enduring the cold. Yet even here, the warmth had limits. The farther you sat from the fire, the colder the air felt, until it seemed as though the stone walls themselves released frost. Heat rose upward and gathered in the smoke-darkened rafters, while those below wrapped themselves in cloaks and leaned close together. In reality, only a small number were truly comfortable, and the rest simply acted as if they were. Chroniclers note an interesting detail: feasts often served a practical purpose as well. Nobles planned their largest gatherings during the coldest months, aware that the combined body heat of many guests, along with the roaring hearth, could make the hall almost comfortable. Some records even suggest servants were instructed to stand nearer to one another to create additional warmth. In that sense, Feasting supported survival as much as celebration. But the warmth of the hall was temporary. When the meal ended, the musicians set aside their instruments, and guests made their way to their quarters. Eventually, the fire was allowed to die down. Embers glowed red in a final resistance against the cold, and long shadows stretched across the stone walls. The heat you relied on during the evening faded quickly. Within an hour or two, the hall itself returned to a quiet, biting chill. Picture yourself lingering near the hearth, reluctant to leave, extending your hands to capture every remaining trace of heat. Your face feels warm, yet your back already senses the cold advancing, reminding you of what awaits above. Smoke irritates your eyes and settles into your clothes, but still you hesitate to climb the spiral stairs to your chamber. Historians continue to debate whether some castles introduced more advanced heating systems for their great halls. A few argue that vents and flues helped distribute warmth, particularly in later centuries. Others believe this view overestimates medieval building priorities, noting that comfort was rarely a central concern. Most agree on the harsher conclusion: the Great Hall was warm only close to the fire and nowhere else. Even the acoustics reinforced this reality. Laughter echoed sharply, footsteps carried across the vast space, making the chamber feel expansive and austere rather than inviting. When it emptied, the silence felt heavy, as though you were seated inside the hollow body of a massive structure at rest. One of the clearest images is the transition itself, the walk from the great hall to the bedchamber. You step away from the golden light of the hearth into a narrow corridor lit by a single torch. The draft reaches you at once, a sharp current of air slipping through arrow slits and poorly sealed doors. Your breath becomes visible again. The warmth stored in your body drains away, as if the castle absorbs it. That movement from brief comfort to persistent cold defined medieval nights. At times, nobles remained in the hall so long they nearly slept there. A high-backed bench drawn close to the hearth could act as a temporary bed, and guards or servants often rested near the embers instead of returning to their chambers. Sleeping beside the fire meant accepting sparks, smoke, and lingering noise, but compared to the frozen stone above, it was often preferable. Records also reveal that travelers frequently complained more about the walk from the hall to their rooms than about the sleep itself. That short exposure to the cold was described as a physical shock. Some accounts mention shivering that lasted through the night because of that single journey. It was as though the castle imposed a reminder that comfort was temporary. The fading glow of the hall carried a psychological weight as well. Once you stepped away from it, you understood the night ahead would be long and severe. The Great Hall was more than a room, it was a ritual, a final gathering of warmth before yielding to the cold. Each extinguished torch and emptied cup marked another step toward a difficult night in bed. Even by candlelight, you sense how brief comfort truly was. The fire that once burned intensely now murmurs softly, sparks breaking and disappearing. A servant stirs it without enthusiasm, then stops, leaving the embers to dim. The earlier sounds of laughter and dining vanish, replaced by the low creaks of the castle settling into darkness. Reluctantly, you begin the climb upward, cloak secured tightly around you, the memory of warmth fading with every step. The glow of the hall lingers in your thoughts like something already lost. Meanwhile, your toes grow numb, your fingers ache, and you recognize that the remainder of the night will revolve around preserving heat. That short-lived warmth helped people endure. The routine of gathering, eating, and standing near the fire before the cold returned gave structure to the evening. Without the Great Hall, castle life would have been far more difficult. With it, at least for a few hours, people could recall what warmth felt like. You continue higher into the keep, leaving the diminishing glow behind, and the air shifts immediately. The fire's warmth disappears, replaced by a damp chill that settles into your bones. The walls are massive, thicker than those of modern houses, sometimes 12 feet of solid stone separating you from the outside. At first, that seems reassuring. Yet the irony is clear. The same walls that blocked arrows and siege engines also held the cold within. If you have ever entered a basement in winter, you recognize the feeling. Stone preserves temperature like a record, releasing cold even when the air outside briefly softens. Medieval builders mastered durability and defense, But comfort was secondary, and those powerful walls became a contradiction in themselves. Fortresses protected their inhabitants from human threats, but they offered little defense against harsh weather. Historians widely agree that castles rarely stayed warm beyond a small area surrounding the hearth. A fire burned brightly, and smoke rose upward, yet just 10 feet away, the air felt freezing again. Written accounts from the 13th and 14th centuries describe noble families seated directly before the flames, cloaks drawn over their heads, while servants stood behind them stamping their feet to maintain circulation. The fire formed a limited pocket of bearable warmth, but the surrounding stone remained cold and unresponsive. Travelers' journals add another revealing detail. Some visitors reported that the walls seemed to sweat. Moisture condensed on the chilled stone and ran down in visible streaks, leaving chambers damp and uncomfortable. Imagine lying in bed while steady droplets hit the floor beside you throughout the night. It was hardly a soothing sound. During certain seasons, moss even appeared on interior walls. Living in a castle could at times feel less like residing in a palace and more like dwelling in a cave. Modern scholars continue to debate whether tapestries and wall hangings truly improved indoor warmth. Popular images show grand rooms lined with thick woven fabrics, but did these materials genuinely insulate, or were they mainly decorative? Some researchers argue that they reduced drafts and created slightly warmer pockets of air behind the fabric. Others suggest this effect has been overstated in later romanticized portrayals, noting that even heavy cloth could not counteract freezing air entering through unglazed windows and gaps around doors. The discussion remains unresolved, but it highlights one clear point: residents were willing to try nearly any method to combat the cold. Now consider entering a bedchamber in late January. The hearth fire is small and fading. The walls rise high and slick with condensation, even when covered with layers of wool. The cold is immediate. A large bed stands in the center, its heavy curtains drawn closed. Inside those curtains, the air may be marginally warmer, forming a modest barrier against the chill. Outside them, the chamber feels stark and unwelcoming. The psychological toll was significant. Contemporary writings suggest that many people feared the cold more than hunger or illness. Hunger and sickness could pass. Winter cold returned every night. In a castle, there was no true escape. That constant exposure left a lasting impression. You lie beneath thick coverings, listening to wind slipping through narrow arrow slits. Your ears sting, your fingers grow stiff, and even sleep brings uneasy dreams shaped by cold and fire. The stone walls no longer feel protective. Instead, they resemble an unyielding structure that traps the cold inside. This perspective shifts common assumptions. Castles were not consistently comfortable residences. They functioned as defensive structures, but comfort was often sacrificed for security. Each winter night reinforced the reality that while stone could shield against arrows, it did little to preserve warmth. Sleeping in a medieval castle was less about peaceful rest and more about continuous resistance to environmental hardship. The opponent was invisible yet persistent, and the setting remained unchanged. Your chamber, your bed, your body. As you cross the chamber floor, your boots do not step onto carpets or polished boards. Instead, they press into rushes scattered across the stone. These were not placed for decoration alone. They served practical purposes, softening the surface underfoot, absorbing spills, and providing a basic layer of insulation. Records from the later Middle Ages note that households replaced rushes several times a year, spreading them thickly in halls and private rooms. When freshly laid, they carried a mild outdoor scent, grassy and earthy. For a short time, they introduced a trace of freshness indoors. They added cushioning, reduced noise, and helped retain limited warmth near the floor. However, their benefits were temporary. Over time, rushes became soiled. Food scraps, spilled drink, and leftover bones settled among them. Rodents and insects moved freely across the floor. By winter's end, conditions could deteriorate significantly. One French moralist remarked that it resembled sleeping in a midden. Rushes performed a dual function. In addition to holding a thin layer of warmth, they absorbed moisture from damp stone. In chambers where condensation dripped regularly, this was important. Without them, residents would have walked across wet, slippery surfaces. Some English household records mention the addition of herbs such as lavender and rosemary among the rushes. This practice had practical intent. Strong scents helped mask unpleasant odors from decay, while also introducing a subtle sense of comfort into rooms heavy with smoke and dampness. A faint trace of lavender might reach you as you prepared for sleep, blending with the sharper smells of wool and wood smoke. It did not solve the problem of cold, but it could make conditions slightly more tolerable. Architectural historians continue to debate the true effectiveness of rushes. Some argue they offered genuine insulation between feet and stone. Others maintain their impact was limited, emphasizing that most heat escaped through walls and ceilings. Surviving evidence is incomplete, leaving the question open: were rushes an effective medieval strategy for warmth, or primarily a customary practice with modest benefit? Picture yourself lying in bed as a servant spreads fresh rushes across the chamber. They compress softly underfoot, releasing faint aromas. For a brief period, the room feels orderly. Yet by the next day, the rushes will have absorbed moisture, and gradual decay will resume. The sensory experience of such a bedroom was complex. Beneath blankets of wool or fur, you might find some comfort. Surrounding you, however, lingered the scent of aging plant matter, strong herbs, and persistent smoke. The floor stirred as mice searched for crumbs. Each element underscored a central reality: sleep was shaped by endurance rather than luxury. At the same time, there was practical ingenuity in these measures. People relied on simple materials gathered from fields and riverbanks, transforming them into tools for surviving winter. They did not think in terms of modern insulation or carpeting. They focused on any method that could reduce the chill, even slightly. As you rest in this imagined chamber, you recognize that even the floor contributed to the nightly effort against cold. Stone represented the primary challenge. Rushes formed a modest barrier. Each morning raised the same concern: how long before dampness and decay undermined these fragile defenses? Now you sit at the edge of the bed, feeling the many layers of cloth arranged above it. If there was a consistent medieval strategy against nighttime cold, it was fabric. Wool, linen, and fur were layered repeatedly until the sleeper was wrapped tightly, more enclosed than relaxed. Household inventories from the period clearly demonstrate the importance of textiles in daily life. Linen sheets formed the base layer, smooth and cool against the skin, though far less insulating than the layers placed above. On top came thick wool blankets, heavy enough that some compared their weight to that of a hound. If you were wealthy, you added fur coverlets, fox, sable, or even bear. Nobles spent large sums on such bedding, not only as a display of status, but because without it, winter nights could become dangerous. There is a humorous note in some sources. Servants occasionally joked that their masters could barely move once tucked in. The many layers pressed them down so firmly that turning over required real effort. Picture yourself wrapped in 5 or 6 dense blankets, tucked so tightly that you either remain still or risk pulling the covers loose and letting in the cold. Warmth came at the expense of movement, a compromise most people accepted. Fur deserves closer attention. Beyond its luxury, it served a practical purpose. Arctic fox pelts, marten skins, and sheepskin all offered concentrated warmth. One chronicler describes a noblewoman in Burgundy who refused to travel without her ermine-lined bed covers, even during summer, because she feared catching a chill at night. Today that may seem excessive, but in an era when drafts cut through every chamber, concern about cold was reasonable. An unusual belief appears in certain households. Some people thought sleeping under too much linen was unhealthy, as linen was believed to draw heat from the body. To counter this, they layered wool or fur above and below, forming what might be called a textile sandwich. The theory suggested linen cooled, wool warmed, and fur sealed in the heat. Whether this idea held scientific merit is doubtful, but it shows how practical measures often blended with traditional beliefs. Historians continue to debate the social meaning of these materials. Was fur mainly about survival, or did it primarily signal rank? On one side, inventories reveal that wealthy nobles owned large numbers of fur coverlets. On the other, poorer families endured winters with coarse wool alone. Some scholars argue that furs symbolized power and position, while others maintain they were necessary in draft-filled castles. The most likely conclusion is that they served both purposes, essential protection and visible prestige. Now imagine lying beneath these layers. The wool scratches lightly against your skin, rougher than modern fabrics. Above it, the fur feels dense and somewhat restrictive, yet it keeps the cold away. The blankets press you into the straw mattress with noticeable weight. You adjust slightly, careful not to disturb the protective layers. Any larger movement might invite cold air inside. Your breath warms the small space around your face while the rest of your body depends entirely on cloth as a barrier. In the quiet room, every sensation stands out: the soft rustle of linen, the coarse texture of wool, the faint musky scent of animal pelts. There is something direct and elemental about it. You are wrapped in natural fibers and skins, each thread a reminder that survival depends on turning the environment into protection. This captures the essence of medieval sleep. Rest meant building a fortress within a fortress, not with stone walls and moats, but with sheets and furs. Each evening required layering yourself against the cold with whatever textiles were available. Without them, even the grandest castle chamber would feel like a stone vault. As you lie in this imagined cocoon, the nightly routine becomes clear: gather layers, weigh them down, and trust they will last until morning. The wind may shake the shutters and slip through the walls, but inside your fabric barrier, you maintain a reasonable chance of comfort. The bed itself was more than furniture. It functioned as a system designed to create a small, livable climate within an otherwise harsh room. When you draw back the heavy curtains of a medieval four-poster bed, you are not simply entering a private space. You are stepping into a carefully designed shelter. Detailed inventories from noble households show how important these beds were. Unlike the simple pallets used by peasants, these frames stood high above the ground, often as tall as a person, carved from oak or walnut. The posts rose like pillars, frequently decorated, supporting a canopy overhead. That canopy was not purely ornamental. With curtains draped along the sides, it trapped body heat inside, turning a freezing chamber into a space that felt somewhat warmer. It functioned like a tent placed within a bedroom. Once the curtains were drawn, the difference could be noticeable. Heat from your breath, your body, and the thick bedding collected inside, even when the surrounding room hovered just above freezing. Those few extra degrees might separate an unbearable night from a manageable one. There is a record of a French duchess who traveled with her bed dismantled and transported by cart. The effort seems extreme, but the reason was clear. The bed provided essential protection. Sleeping in an unfamiliar castle or abbey without one's own canopy and curtains risked a night of constant shivering. English records add another detail. Some bed curtains were waxed or lined with oiled cloth to block drafts more effectively. Imagine closing them, heavy fabric carrying a faint scent of beeswax or resin. They reduced airflow, limited light, and muffled sound, creating a sense of privacy in rooms that were rarely fully private. Modern scholars still question how effective these beds truly were. Did they significantly raise temperatures, or do later portrayals exaggerate their value? Archaeological findings suggest that the curtains were indeed thick and layered, supporting the idea that they worked. Yet some argue that the benefit was partly psychological, the comfort of enclosure in a vast, cold space. The debate continues, but it is clear that people valued these beds enough to treat portable versions as necessities. Now picture yourself settling into one. The bed creaks under your weight. The straw mattress shifts softly. You reach to draw the curtain closed. Immediately, the air changes. It remains cold but no longer exposed to direct drafts from narrow windows. Your breath fogs less quickly. As you relax beneath layered covers, sleep feels possible. The curtain softens distant sounds: the drip of water, a servant's cough, a dog barking outside. Inside, the scent of fabric and fur lingers, faint yet reassuring. Only the movement of blankets breaks the silence. The chamber beyond may be large and unforgiving, but within your bed you have created a sheltered space against the elements. It was not perfect. Some nights the curtains stiffened with frozen condensation. Other times smoke from the hearth drifted inside and disturbed your rest. Even so, for many nobles, the four-poster canopy bed represented the strongest defense available against nightly cold. This reveals a practical ingenuity. Without central heating, they constructed a private climate. Without insulation, they relied on thick curtains and layered textiles. Each night involved adjusting to the cold, and the canopy bed served as a workable compromise. Imagine lying there now, your eyelids growing heavy as the world beyond the curtain fades into quiet. The chamber remains cold and the castle still lets in drafts, yet you have created a corner where survival seems achievable. You begin to drift toward sleep, not because the air has grown warmer, but because through layers of fabric and wood, you have managed to resist it just enough. Beneath the blankets and curtains, the true foundation of your rest is the mattress itself. What supports your body determines whether the night passes in relative comfort or whether you wake sore, chilled, and irritable. In the Middle Ages, bedding appeared in several forms, but two were most common: the feather bed and the straw tick. The feather bed represented luxury. Picture lowering yourself onto a sack filled with goose or duck feathers, soft and flexible, shaping gently around your body while holding warmth. Estate inventories from noble households frequently mention multiple feather beds, carefully stored and transported whenever a lord relocated. A well-filled feather mattress could be so thick that it raised the sleeper nearly a foot above the bed frame, providing cushioning in an otherwise harsh stone chamber. Families valued them, protected them, and handed them down as prized belongings. They were not only comfortable, they signaled status. However, feather beds had drawbacks. They could become excessively warm, trapping body heat until sleepers awoke sweating, even during winter. A 15th-century letter records a guest complaining that his host's bed swallowed him like a goose in a pot. Too many feathers caused the body to sink too deeply, turning what should have been gentle support into an effort to shift and find balance. For most people, the reality was the straw tick, a large sack packed with straw, hay, or reeds, stuffed until it formed a basic mattress. Peasants used them, soldiers relied on them, and castles placed them in lesser chambers. They were inexpensive, simple to refill, and reasonably effective at lifting a sleeper off the freezing floor. Yet straw presented its own problems. It compressed quickly, sharp ends pushed through fabric, and fleas often lived within it. Households regularly beat and shook the sacks to restore shape and remove pests. By morning, your skin might itch from scratches, but you had made it through the night. Some contemporary accounts note that herbs were mixed into the straw, not only to improve the scent but also to deter insects. Lavender, mint, or pennyroyal might be added, leaving a faint fragrance that masked the damp odor of hay. Even so, anyone who has rested on a straw-filled mattress understands that the earthy, musty smell lingers in clothing and hair. Historians continue to debate how common feather beds truly were. Some believe they were rare luxuries limited to the highest ranks of society. Others cite records showing that middling households owned at least one, suggesting they were more widespread. The disagreement reflects incomplete evidence, yet it also shows how important sleeping surfaces were, important enough to be carefully documented. Imagine lying on a straw tick in a drafty chamber. The sack shifts beneath you, uneven lumps pressing into your back. Each movement releases a faint grassy scent mixed with herbs. Somewhere in the rushes on the floor, mice scurry, and you consider whether they might approach. Heavy blankets weigh down from above, but the straw beneath reminds you that comfort in this era was uncertain. Now picture the alternative, a feather bed in a noble chamber. You sink into softness, supported by down. It feels pleasant until the warmth becomes stifling. The feathers move and form a hollow that holds you tightly. You push at the blankets, searching for cooler air, but the curtains keep the heat contained. Eventually you sleep again, aware that even this discomfort is far preferable to straw. The contrast between straw and feathers reflected the medieval social order. To sleep on feathers suggested privilege. To rest on straw meant accepting necessity. Both options, however, addressed the same challenge: keeping the body alive within cold stone walls. As you imagine settling into bed, it becomes clear that medieval sleepers were not passive. Every mattress, simple or elaborate, represented planning, adjustment, and a modest victory over harsh conditions. Going to bed involved choice, sink into feathers or endure straw, all to reach morning safely. Even the most carefully arranged bed, complete with curtains, feather mattresses, and piles of blankets, could not always ensure survival. On the coldest nights, the decisive factor was not furniture but companionship. Sleeping alone in a stone chamber allowed body heat to dissipate into the walls. Sleeping beside others multiplied warmth, bodies functioning like radiators in the dark. Noble households understood this, though it was rarely stated directly. Servants often slept in adjacent rooms or on pallets at the foot of their master's bed. The arrangement was not solely about duty or protection, it was practical. More occupants meant slightly higher temperatures. The difference might seem minor, but when frost formed on the inside of shutters, every additional body mattered. Medieval monastic records show monks resting in long rows, their cots or straw beds placed side by side in drafty dormitories. The purpose was not only discipline or community. It also increased collective warmth. The same pattern appeared in barracks, where soldiers lay in lines, cloaks wrapped tightly, relying on shared heat to endure the cold. A 14th-century English manor provides an illustrative example. In one nobleman's will, he directed that his favored squire be allowed a place near his chamber fire at night. Scholars interpret this not only as a sign of favor but also as recognition that proximity and shared warmth held tangible value. To be invited into a chamber or bed was not merely social closeness, it was access to heat. Animals added another layer. Dogs, in particular, served as practical sources of warmth. Although the phrase three-dog night comes from later folklore, the underlying idea reflects historical practice. Hounds were often permitted into beds for both companionship and heat. Large mastiffs curled at your feet could prevent numbness and preserve comfort. Travelers reported inns where guests slept close together with dogs, goats, or even sheep nearby. The smell was strong, yet warmth outweighed inconvenience. Debate continues regarding how acceptable bed sharing was among the elite. Some historians argue it was common: lords with trusted companions, ladies with maids, travelers with strangers. Others contend that among high-ranking individuals, such closeness was restricted, with servants placed on nearby pallets rather than in the bed itself. What is certain is that among lower classes, shared beds were routine. Families slept together, parents, children, and sometimes grandparents, under a single set of blankets. Privacy held little importance when survival was the priority. Now imagine lying in such a bed, not alone but pressed shoulder to shoulder with others. At first it feels awkward. Elbows nudge. Someone coughs. A blanket shifts out of place. But soon, warmth spreads. A shared cocoon of body heat forms. You feel the dog's weight on your feet, hear the gentle breathing of companions, and slowly your muscles relax. Outside, the castle may howl with wind, but within this cluster, comfort feels almost real. Of course, there were downsides. Fleas and lice spread easily, and whispered secrets traveled in the dark. Yet, when weighed against shivering through a sleepless night, the choice was clear: warmth over dignity, companionship over solitude. To a modern perspective, sharing a bed with servants, siblings, or animals may seem uncomfortable. For medieval sleepers, however, it was a practical survival strategy, passed down as common sense. In a world of stone walls and freezing air, every extra body was a blessing. Tonight, as you pull your blanket tighter, imagine those long-ago sleepers who faced the same cold with fewer defenses. Their solution was simple: share warmth and hope the night treated them kindly. Now imagine extinguishing your candle and settling under the covers. It isn't just the blankets or curtains keeping you warm. Clothing played a crucial role. Unlike modern habits, slipping into pajamas or sleeping naked, medieval people often went to bed nearly as bundled as they were during the day. Clothing itself became part of the insulation system. Records and surviving garments show the standard bedtime attire was the nightshirt, a long, loose linen garment, similar to an oversized tunic. Linen might not sound warm today, but it was practical, easy to wash, smooth against the skin, and breathable. On colder nights, an extra wool tunic or cloak might be added. To medieval minds, more layers meant better protection. One detail stands out: the nightcap or qua. Small cloth caps tied under the chin or snug over the head were considered essential, because most body heat was thought to escape through the head. A sleeper without a qua was dangerously exposed. Illuminated manuscripts show figures tucked in bed with heads wrapped, appearing more ready for travel than sleep. Night shirts varied in length. Poor families often repurposed their day undertunic, while wealthy nobles commissioned embroidered or fur-edged versions. Some ladies even had sleeping hoods trailing with ribbons, though practicality is questionable. Whatever the style, the principle was clear: cover everything possible. A 15th-century medical text even advised binding feet in linen or wool against night air. Extremities froze first, so people wrapped toes, ankles, and hands in strips of cloth, makeshift socks and mittens. You can almost feel it: hands swaddled, feet cocooned, every inch shielded from relentless cold. Scholars debate how common specialized sleep clothing was versus simply wearing daytime garments. Some argue peasants slept in daywear, others cite inventories mentioning night linens, showing that at least middle and upper classes used distinct sleep attire. Both views hold truth, depending on rank and region. One thing is certain: covering up at night was essential. Picture preparing for bed in this way. Heavy layers removed, slipping into a long linen shirt, snug cap over your ears. The cold nips at your neck until blankets rise. Every layer adds a tiny defense, together forming a cocoon. The bed may be drafty, the room freezing, but your body becomes a fortress of cloth. The sensory details are vivid. Linen feels cool and slightly scratchy at first, warming with your skin. Wool smells faintly of sheep and lanolin, earthy yet comforting. The cap presses gently, muffling sound and creating a sense of enclosure. Swaddled like a parcel, you wait for sleep. Night clothes served another purpose: modesty. With bed sharing common, being half-dressed or naked was unacceptable. Even married couples were often depicted in manuscripts wearing caps and long shirts. Nightwear was both practical and social. Consider the rhythm of such nights: dressing not down but up, layering cloth, tying knots, smoothing wrinkles before extinguishing the light. Modern nightwear suggests relaxation. Medieval nightwear was armor against the elements. Tonight, as you tug your blanket, imagine those bundled in linen and wool, heads wrapped against the dark, sleep-engineered stitch by stitch, layer by layer, against the siege of cold stone. Now envision a servant entering with a long-handled warming pan, brass glowing in firelight. Hot coals crackle and hiss, filling the room with ash and heated metal scent. This simple yet ingenious tool transformed frozen sheets into something inviting. The pan slid back and forth, radiating heat through tiny perforations. Smoke rose, scent of burning wood filled the air. Without it, one might shiver for an hour before body heat softened the chill. Inventories from noble households list warming pans alongside candlesticks and chamber pots, ordinary tools of nightly life. By the late Middle Ages, wealthy European homes considered them essential in winter. A chamber without one indicated neglect or low status. These pans carried risks. Letters from the period complain of scorched or even burning sheets if a pan stayed too long in one place. Some accounts tell of noblemen springing from bed at sparks catching blankets in wooden chambers. One Italian text describes sprinkling aromatic herbs on coals to purify the air and ward off disease. Imagine lavender and rosemary mingling with ember smoke as you finally climb beneath the covers. The medieval belief system blended practicality with superstition. Every night was a struggle against both the biting cold and invisible illnesses. Historians of domestic life still debate how common warming pans really were. Some suggest they were mostly limited to wealthy households, too costly and risky for ordinary families. Others argue that simpler versions, like clay pots filled with embers wrapped in cloth, were used by middle-class households. The truth is hard to determine, as these humble items rarely survived. What is clear, however, is that some method of preheating beds existed throughout society, even if its form varied. Now, imagine watching the process in your chamber. A servant carefully drags the warming pan across the sheets. Steam rises faintly as dampness evaporates. When the pan is removed, the air under the covers is unexpectedly warm, almost startling after the cold of the room. You slip inside quickly, eager to trap the heat. For a few minutes, the cocoon feels blissful, like stealing a fragment of summer in the middle of winter. But the warmth doesn't last. The chill of the castle walls returns. The warming pan's purpose was never to keep you warm all night. It was to make the first moments of sleep bearable. Once your body relaxed, exhaustion overcame the shivering, and you could drift into slumber, letting your own heat sustain you. The warming pan symbolized compromise. It could not conquer the cold entirely, but it offered a start. In a way, it was a bargain with the night. Give me a few minutes of comfort and I'll endure the rest. As you lie there, drifting off with the faint scent of embers clinging to your sheets, you sense how ritualized medieval sleep truly was. Every evening involved a choreography of tools, garments, and gestures. The warming pan wasn't a luxury for show, it was part of the survival kit. Without it, many nights would have begun in misery rather than rest. As you stir under imagined blankets, a weight presses against your legs. A warm, solid shape curls into the crook of your knees, settling in for the night. It isn't another person. It's a dog, or perhaps two, maybe even three if fortune favors you. Allowing animals in the bed was common. Dogs were not only guardians or hunting companions, they were heaters. Their thick coats radiated warmth, and their loyalty ensured they stayed close during long, dark nights. A castle chamber that felt like an ice cave could become bearable with a few hounds at your feet. Later medieval records occasionally mention small lap dogs gifted to noble women. These dogs provided companionship and, importantly, warmth. They were pampered, brushed, even perfumed, but their primary role was to ward off winter's chill. Larger dogs stretched across the bed's bottom, protecting toes from frostbite. Even Scandinavian accounts note that winter travelers sometimes preferred sleeping in animal stalls to unheated guest rooms. Horses, cattle, and sheep generated enough warmth to make sleep near them preferable. Imagine drifting off beside a cow, the air scented with hay, your body warmed by its bulk, practical, though not glamorous. Dogs, however, offered something more intimate. A medieval French proverb claimed that a faithful dog keeps the frost away from its master's heart, a statement both literal and poetic. The animal's warmth sustained the body while its presence soothed the spirit in drafty castles. Scholars debate how universal this practice was. Some say animals in noble beds were private indulgences, frowned upon in formal households. Others argue the evidence shows it was widespread, especially in rural or frontier castles, where survival mattered more than etiquette. Whether a lady with a lapdog is romanticized or factual remains part of the discussion. Now, picture the scene. You lie swaddled in linen nightwear and wool blankets, bed curtains drawn tight. The wind shrieks outside along the battlements. Your toes ache from cold until the warmth of a hound presses against them. Its fur is coarse and solid, carrying the scent of hunt and outdoors, yet you welcome it. Another dog curls by your side. You are cocooned, not just in cloth, but in living heat. The chamber may still be icy, but the bed transforms the world. Of course, there were inconveniences. Dogs shed hair, carried dirt, and sometimes chewed bones hidden under the covers. Insects traveled with them. Still, the trade-off was worth it. Better fleas than frostbite. Better a soiled blanket than a night without sleep. The sensory mix was unforgettable: earthy dog fur, faint smoke clinging to your clothes, the weight of blankets, and the steady rhythm of another creature's breathing. People spoke of their animals with near reverence. Sharing warmth meant sharing survival. The phrase, three-dog night, though coined later, captures medieval sleeping habits. One dog for manageable cold, two for serious chill, three for bitter nights when every source of heat was stacked into the bed. Tonight, as you lie in your own bed, consider how extraordinary it must have felt for people in stone castles, isolated and cold, to find strength and comfort from the loyalty of an animal curled beside them. In this small exchange, human and dog survived winter nights together. Now, step outside the noble chamber in your imagination. Across the courtyard, in the shadowed servants' quarters, another world of sleep unfolds. The contrast between peasant and noble slumber was stark, yet the goal, survival through bitter nights, was the same. Who truly slept warmer? The answer might surprise you. Nobles had grandeur, feather beds, fur blankets, warming pans, and thick canopies. But grandeur did not guarantee comfort. Vast chambers were hard to heat, stone absorbed warmth. Even with roaring fireplaces, air could freeze before your eyes. Meanwhile, peasants lived in small timber houses where a single hearth could warm the entire room. Straw-thatched roofs insulated well. Families huddled together, often with animals nearby, creating tolerable warmth. A 14th-century visitor noted with mild astonishment that these humble huts held heat better than a lord's tower. Yet, in the end, status determined more than mere comfort. Nobles had access to finer materials, high-quality wool, imported furs, and linen that softened with repeated washing. Peasants, by contrast, made do with coarse wool, patched blankets, or roughly cured sheepskins. Their bedding carried the strong sense of lanolin and hearth smoke. While functional and insulating, it was never luxurious. One curious detail from historical records notes that peasants sometimes slept directly on benches near the fire, children curled in their laps. They risked sparks and smoke, yet the closeness to the hearth guaranteed warmth. Noble bedrooms, set apart from the great hall, often lacked that immediate heat. Comfort, therefore, was unevenly distributed in unexpected ways. Scholars today still debate the true hierarchy of warmth. Did wealth automatically ensure better sleep, or did peasants, in their smaller but snug homes, endure winter nights more effectively? Evidence points both ways. Some argue the sheer quantity of noble textiles gave them the advantage. Others claim that the smaller communal spaces of peasants offered practical warmth that the aristocracy's grand rooms could not match. The question remains unresolved, illustrating how sleep mirrored social divisions. Picture the scenes side by side. In a castle, a nobleman shifts under heavy layers, his breath forming small clouds, the vast room echoing every gust of wind. In a village, a peasant family squeezes onto a straw mattress near the hearth. Children curl like kittens, and the smell of nearby animals drifts in. One bed is ornate but formal, the other crowded and earthy. Which body wakes warmer? Perhaps no single answer fits. Yet both noble and peasant shared a truth: they adapted. Survival in the medieval night was not about pure comfort, but about adjusting homes and habits to make rest possible. Nobles relied on luxury, peasants on closeness and simplicity, but both slept beneath the same winter stars, shivering and dreaming toward morning. You might assume a noble bed, massive and heavily carved, never moved. In reality, families shifted sleeping arrangements with the seasons. Bedrooms were flexible spaces, chosen for sunlight, fire, and wind. Winter rooms faced the southern sun, gaining precious warmth, while summer rooms were north-facing and cooler. Records from noble estates, such as Edward Ivy's household, show entire beds, furnishings, and tapestries moved seasonally. Servants carried mattresses, linens, and hangings to create temporary nests wherever the family chose to rest. Even minor courtiers noted cold rooms so unbearable that they opted for smaller, sunlit chambers. Castles themselves could be adversaries of warmth, conquered and retaken with each season. Archaeologists debate whether all castles offered multiple seasonal chambers or if this was a luxury of the wealthiest estates. Some claim most castles had only a few suitable rooms, forcing occupants to endure the cold. Others argue window placements, fireplaces, and records show intentional seasonal design. Either way, the image is clear: noble families moved within their own walls like birds shifting nests. Imagine following this routine. In autumn, you seek the sunlit side of the keep, knowing long nights demand every advantage. Servants dismantle your bed, frame, mattress, and hangings, while carpenters adjust posts in the new chamber. Tapestries are hung to block drafts. By first frost, you are in a room warmed by pale shafts of morning light. You feel thin sunlight through shutters, smell woolen curtains, and hear servants sweeping rushes across the floor. The cold remains, but it is managed, turning unbearable into survivable. Peasants also shifted sleeping spaces seasonally, though less formally. Families huddled around the hearth in winter, then retreated to lofts or barns in summer. In castles and cottages alike, sleep was dictated by elements, not fixed design. Bedrooms were temporary camps rather than permanent sanctuaries. Beds moved, chambers rotated, life adapted with the seasons. The castle itself was alive, shaped by light and temperature, its inhabitants shifting like nomads within its walls. Medieval sleep was dynamic. Fighting the cold required movement, planning, and constant adjustment. People did not sleep where they wished, but where sun, wind, and damp allowed. Each year, the cycle repeated. Stand by a castle window and feel the draft slip across your skin. Unlike modern homes, windows were mere holes, defenses against arrows, but open to wind. Glass was rare, reserved for chapels or private oratories. Ordinary chambers had wooden shutters, thick planks that barred from the inside. In summer, they opened for air. In winter, they shut tight, creaking in the wind. Cold seeped through cracks, so cloth, linen soaked in oil or wax, was stretched across openings to let in dim light and block drafts. By day, it cast a soft amber glow. By night, it muffled the wind without silencing it. The fabric flapped, the wooden frame rattled, and inhabitants grew accustomed to the constant reminder that their fortress was not airtight. One notable record comes from a 13th-century French household account, which mentions horn windows. Thin slices of animal horn were scraped until translucent and set into wooden frames. These offered a crude, yet sturdier alternative to cloth. They allowed pale light to enter and resisted the weather better, though they yellowed quickly and warped. Looking through such panes blurred the world outside, as if seen through fogged glass. Inside, the air was only marginally less harsh. Scholars and architectural historians debate how widespread horn or oiled cloth windows were. Some claim they were luxury items found only in the wealthiest castles, while others suggest they were surprisingly common in Northern Europe by the later Middle Ages. Evidence is scarce, but the discussion highlights how resourceful people were in creating barriers against the cold. Imagine standing at one of these windows. The shutter is closed, cloth stretched across the frame, yet frost still forms along the sill. Your breath clouds as you lean near it. Outside, the moon reflects off the snow. Inside, you hear the faint rattle of wood and the wind seeking a gap. No matter how carefully bed curtains are hung, drafts always found their way through. The sounds were unsettling, distant shutters banging, fabric snapping like sails, servants muttering as they stuffed rags into cracks. Some households even pressed moss or clay into gaps around frames to insulate. It was messy, temporary, but any protection against freezing nights was valued. Peasants faced similar struggles. Many cottages had no glass, only shutters to cover narrow slits. Some used thin membranes from animal bladders to let in light. The effect was ghostly. Rooms glowed faintly with distorted shadows, as if the outside world were behind a veil. At night, even these coverings stiffened with frost, turning translucent sheets into brittle ice. For nobles, the irony was sharp. High towers provided status and defense but exposed inhabitants to piercing winds. Guests sometimes noted that higher sleeping quarters felt colder. A peasant might envy a lord's wealth but not the icy draft whistling through a tower window. Yet there was beauty too. Picture a moonlit night, shutters cracked just enough for silver light to wash the floor. The cold seeped in, casting poetic shadows, the silhouettes of branches, the faint glow of snow. Medieval sleep balanced discomfort with fleeting wonder, where the harshest nights also offered fragile peace. When you draw your curtains tonight, think of those ancient windows. They were less about keeping out the cold and more about reminding occupants that walls alone could never fully protect them. Sleep wasn't about conquering the cold, it was about living with it, draft after draft, until morning came. Now imagine approaching a castle hearth, expecting warmth from the blaze. The reality was less comforting. Medieval fireplaces were enormous, their chimneys wide enough to feed entire trees. Yet much of the heat escaped directly upward. Flames roared, sparks danced, logs collapsed into embers, and still, just a few steps away, the air remained cold. Fires created a small circle of warmth, but beyond that, castle chambers stayed bitter. Household records emphasize the enormous wood consumption. A large castle might burn wagon loads of timber in a single winter week. Forest management became essential, not only for construction but for fuel. One French lord complained that keeping his hall warm depleted the woods faster than any war. Fires consumed resources but rarely delivered the expected comfort. Guests joked that noble fireplaces were big enough to roast an ox but too weak to warm a person, an exaggeration, yet largely true. Some castles tried iron firebacks or tiled hearths to reflect and store heat. These measures helped, but only partially. The fire might warm your feet if you sat close, while your back froze, and your bed across the room might as well have been outdoors. Scholars debate the effectiveness of these hearths. Some see them as meaningful when paired with hangings and heavy furniture. Others argue they were mostly symbolic, offering status and light rather than real warmth. Likely, results varied by castle, design, and climate. Picture standing in such a room. Sparks fly, smoke curls, your face feels warm, but your shoulders stay cold. You shuffle closer to the fire, hands outstretched, only to retreat when heat fades across the stone floor. By the time you slip under blankets, the warmth is gone. Peasants fared better in small cottages. A single central fire could heat the whole interior, even if smoky. The cramped space, combined with body heat, made warmth more consistent than the grand noble fireplaces, which consumed vast resources yet left rooms half frozen. Still, the fire held ritual significance. Beyond heat, it was light, gathering, reassurance, proof that life persisted against the darkness. People prayed, shared stories, or dozed nearby. Even when warmth didn't reach far, the glow offered psychological comfort, a beacon of life in the cold. So, when you imagine a medieval night, don't picture a roaring fire defeating frost. Picture a fragile island of heat in a sea of icy air, a warmth that lasted only while near, vanishing once you climbed into bed. The hearth was both performance and tool. Medieval sleepers learned to appreciate every small benefit it gave. Yet another reality awaited: smoke. Fireplaces were not clean, efficient systems. They emitted fumes, left soot, and filled rooms with haze. Staying warm meant breathing smoke, accepting blackened walls, and waking with lungs coated in ash. The medieval night demanded compromise. Heat and light came at a cost, and comfort was fleeting. Chroniclers of the period often voiced strong complaints. A monk in northern England described how soot from his hearth covered his cell so thoroughly that he ended up coughing more than he prayed. Nobles were not spared either. Court records mention women mourning ruined gowns and linens stained by constant smoke. Even a newly cleaned tapestry could turn gray within a single winter. The architecture contributed to the problem. Chimneys were wide, rough shafts, lacking the controlled draft of modern systems. Smoke didn't always rise efficiently. It swirled, lingered, and often poured back into rooms when the wind shifted, leaving everyone inside coughing. Imagine trying to sleep while smoke irritated your throat and stung your eyes. Travelers' notes mention that some people smeared their walls with lime or clay, not only to brighten interiors but also to hide soot streaks. The black residue never fully disappeared, but the illusion of cleanliness lasted a little longer. The smell, however, was permanent, a mix of charred wood, damp stone, and burnt wool that clung to blankets and clothing. Scholars debate how tolerable these smoky rooms were. Some argue medieval people adapted, their bodies and expectations hardened to the smoke. Others point out repeated complaints in medical writings, highlighting choked air and blackened lungs. Likely both are true. People endured because they had no choice, but they never stopped complaining. Now, imagine lying in bed after such a night. Your hair smells of smoke. Your blankets hold the acrid tang of ash. Coughing leaves bitterness on your tongue. Bed curtains trap some of the smoke inside, so even your small cocoon carries the ghost of the fire. The chamber may feel warmer, but fresh air has been sacrificed. Peasants faced similar challenges. Many cottages lacked chimneys entirely. Smoke from the central hearth filled the rafters and slowly leaked through thatch. Children grew up in houses perpetually hazed with smoke, their lungs darkened before adulthood. Yet people considered it normal. Some even believed smoke preserved timber, keeping insects away. Survival and superstition were inseparable in every breath. The sensory experience was intense. Soot prickled the skin. Eyes constantly watered. Rushes on the floor collected black dust. Servants swept endlessly, though the effort seemed futile. Each winter was a battle, against smoke, against cold, knowing that improving one often worsened the other. And yet fire was essential. No one survived a castle winter without it. People accepted smoky tapestries, endured coughing, and scrubbed soot from their faces every morning. Warmth demanded sacrifice. Clean air was the cost. Consider your modern bed tonight, comfortable and fresh. Medieval sleepers never had such ease. Every warm night brought another smoky morning. Dreams carried the scent of burning wood, lives lived in soot shadow. When the fire dimmed, the only light often came from a candle. These flames were more than decoration, they offered fragile warmth. Candles in the Middle Ages varied. Wealthy households used beeswax, which burned cleanly, providing a bright flame and faint honey scent, reserved for chapels, ceremonies, and noble chambers. More commonly, people used tallow candles made from animal fat, which smoked and smelled strongly. Falling asleep near burning tallow meant breathing acrid odors mixed with stone dampness and wool musk. Yet candles provided heat. Even a single candle near bed curtains could slightly warm fabric. Some households grouped several candles together, creating small pockets of heat and light. A 14th-century letter records a noblewoman demanding 12 candles in her chamber on winter nights. Servants complained, but her insistence reveals a truth: light was also a source of warmth. The risks were clear. Candle flames toppled easily, and wool or linen curtains were flammable. Fires sparked by carelessness sometimes reduced entire chambers to ashes. One German squire dozed off with a candle on the bed rail, waking to find his blankets ablaze and barely escaping. The danger stemmed from necessity. He sought warmth too close at hand. Scholars debate whether people fully understood these risks or accepted them as routine. Charred textiles suggest accidents were frequent, though wealthy households often assigned servants to monitor lights. Comfort and hazard were inseparable. Now picture a chamber at night. The hearth fire has dwindled to embers, shadows crawling along walls. A single candle burns softly on a wooden stand near the bed. Its glow reaches your hands as you pull the covers closer. The faint warmth touches your face. Wax drips steadily, and smoke lingers. Beyond the curtain, darkness reigns. Subtle sounds fill the room: wick popping, wind sighing, wax hitting metal. Your world shrinks to this small circle of light and heat. The candle is more than illumination, it is a fragile companion against the night. In cottages and inns, simpler versions occurred. Travelers lit rush lights near straw pallets. They burned quickly, hissing and spitting, but offered reassurance. Parents kept lamps near children to chase away cold and fear. Even monks allowed dormitory lamps for safety and necessity. The smell of melted fat and smoke permeated the air. Walls streaked with soot, bedclothes stained with wax. Yet people accepted these imperfections. In the harshest winters, candles were survival tools. As you sleep under modern electric light tonight, imagine the precarious flicker of a medieval flame. It offered enough warmth to rest, but each spark carried risk. Sleep in the Middle Ages was never entirely free from tension, even in the smallest details. To close your eyes was to trust that your fragile flame would survive the night, giving warmth without turning into danger. Step away from the noble chambers, and a very different picture of medieval sleep emerges: the communal dormitory. Not everyone enjoyed thick curtains, feather beds, or personal servants. Monks, soldiers, apprentices, and servants often shared sleeping spaces, where the focus was endurance rather than comfort. Consider a monastery. Monastic rules demanded simplicity, so dormitories were large halls filled with rows of beds or straw pallets. Stone floors stretched endlessly, broken only by narrow windows high above. Each monk had a small cot or mattress, sometimes just a wooden plank with a thin pad. Beds were placed close together, so one could hear the breathing of a neighbor. Privacy was non-existent, but warmth came from numbers. Accounts describe these halls at night: coughing, snoring, the rustle of coarse wool blankets. The air was cold, damp, and heavy, yet the crowded space retained more warmth than an empty private chamber ever could. One chronicler noted that the cloister felt warmer than a lord's tower, the monks huddled together like a sheaf. Military life was harsher. Soldiers in castles or encampments slept in barracks, long rows of men on straw beds, weapons nearby. Blankets were shared, cloaks doubled as covers. The smell of sweat, leather, smoke, and straw filled the air. Yet for the exhausted, even this rough closeness was bearable. To sleep shoulder to shoulder was survival. Some nightly regulations reveal curious details. Candles burned in communal halls not just for light but to comfort the men. The glow gave a psychological warmth even if it barely increased the temperature. The symbolism of flame mattered as much as its heat. Historians debate why people slept communally. Monasteries may have intended dormitories as discipline, a constant reminder of simplicity. Soldiers might have bunked together for camaraderie or because solitude in the cold was impossible. Likely it was a mix of both. Imagine lying in one of these halls. The straw beneath you crackles. A neighbor coughs. Another shifts. Sounds echo beneath high-vaulted ceilings. The smell of smoke and sweat is strong, yet the cold is less sharp than in a solitary room. Your wool blanket scratches your chin. You pull it tighter, grateful for shared warmth even as you long for quiet. The rhythm of the dormitory is unmistakable. Snores rise and fall like waves, punctuated by murmurs of dreams. Somewhere a rat scurries, ignored by men too tired to care. Draft seeps in through high windows, but body heat dulls its bite. Not cozy, perhaps, but safer than being alone in a stone chamber. Apprentices and servants lived similarly. Castles held side chambers and lofts where young boys or maids laid straw pallets, sometimes beneath staircases or in storage rooms. Cloaks were layered, corners transformed into small bedrooms. Unlike nobles, they lacked feather beds or warming pans, but proximity brought warmth. Their quarters were small and crowded, and the sensory experience was striking. Rough wool, musky odors, low hums of breathing, straw scratching, and the faint drip of water. Peace as we know it did not exist. Endurance did. Silence and solitude were not expected. Survival was. So tonight, as you rest in comfort, think of monks in long halls chanting before lights went out, soldiers collapsing after battle, servants curling together in hidden corners. Their warmth came from one another, not silk or fur. Sleep in medieval times was about community as much as comfort. Even in the coldest castles, survival was rarely solitary. Even in this imagined dormitory, warmth was not guaranteed. Fires required tending. In the middle of the night, someone always had to rise, stumble across cold floors, and stoke embers. Medieval sleep was rarely uninterrupted. People awoke not only from straw or neighborly coughs, but from the need to maintain fires. The medieval sleep cycle differed from ours. People rarely expected an uninterrupted 8 hours. Instead, scholars note segmented sleep. The first sleep began after dusk for a few hours. Then came a waking period, sometimes to tend fires, pray, or check on animals and children, followed by a second sleep until dawn. In winter, this break often focused on fire-keeping. Without it, embers died, and rooms became unbearable. A 15th-century physician suggested this interval could be used for reflection, conversation, or intimacy. For a castle servant, however, it was duty. They shuffled across icy floors, tended embers, and prayed the fire would catch. Some rural families rotated fire-watching duties. Monastery bells also rang at intervals, calling monks to prayer and ensuring someone was awake to manage the heat. Sleep was shared, a rhythm tied to responsibility. Historians debate whether segmented sleep was universal or more common in Northern Europe. Some argue it was practical. Long winter nights made uninterrupted sleep impossible. Others suggest it was a cultural habit. Whatever the cause, tending fires was central to nightly life. Imagine waking in the dead of night. The hall is quiet except for snores. You push back your blanket, feel the icy air, and reach for a log. Straw crunches underfoot. Your breath clouds in the cold as you stir dying embers. Sparks flare, logs catch, warmth returns. Relief floods you. Your companions can sleep undisturbed. The sensory details linger, the pop of wood, the glow pushing shadows back, smoke mingling with wool. Fingers ache, yet reviving the fire steadies you. The bed feels warmer than before. Even peasants in cottages followed this rhythm. Their hearths had no protective grates, only open flames burning directly on the floor. A careless sleeper could brush too close to the fire, risking injury or worse, allowing the blaze to spread. Because of this, someone in the household always rose during the night to adjust the logs, stir the embers, and keep watch. Sleep arrived in fragments, interrupted and resumed, always connected to the steady pulse of the flames. You begin to understand that medieval nights were not passive stretches of unconscious rest. They were negotiated, supervised, and carefully guarded. People woke, worked, prayed, checked on livestock, murmured to loved ones, and then returned to their beds. In the darkness, life did not stop. It simply slowed, marked by firelight and the rhythm of breathing. As you lie in your warm bed tonight, imagine the constant alertness required in those cold stone halls. Closing your eyes was never complete surrender. To sleep meant trusting that someone would rise in time to feed the fire and prevent the cold from overtaking the chamber before dawn. You have tended the hearth, slipped back beneath the blankets, and tried to quiet your restless thoughts. Yet there was another medieval pursuit of warmth, born not only from necessity, but from a longing for comfort. For some, the idea of a hot bath before bed lingered like a rare luxury. Bathing in the Middle Ages was complicated. Heating enough water demanded enormous amounts of fuel, and tubs were heavy, awkward pieces of furniture. A warm soak was not a daily routine. It was an event, often shared, yet for those who could afford it, easing into steaming water on a winter night felt almost magical. Chroniclers wrote of noble women lowering themselves into wooden tubs lined with cloth, steam rising in the glow of lamplight, attendants waiting nearby with heated towels. To leave such a bath and slide between sheets was to feel, for a moment, that winter had been defeated. A curious note from Paris records that wealthy citizens sometimes had their tubs placed near fireplaces so that they stepped out into a room already bright with heat. The air carried the scent of rosemary or thyme, herbs added for fragrance and supposed healing properties. For a brief while, skin tingled with warmth, cheeks glowed, and the body felt ready for deep rest. Of course, these pleasures were uncommon. More often, people relied on smaller comforts before sleep. A cup of warm ale, spiced wine, or heated mead offered simple relief. The warmth moved inward, spreading through the chest and easing the body toward drowsiness. Some households kept stones beside the hearth, wrapped them in cloth, and placed them at the foot of the bed, early versions of hot water bottles that released heat for hours. One unusual account mentions noble families filling leather pouches with warmed sand to tuck beneath the blankets. Sand held heat longer than stone and shaped itself to the body. Picture stretching your frozen feet toward such a pouch, exhaling as the chill slowly retreats. The creativity is remarkable. Confronted with severe winters, people experimented with whatever materials they possessed. Modern historians still debate how common these bedtime comforts truly were. Were they rare treats reserved for the wealthiest households, or did middle families practice simpler versions? Some scholars argue that heated stones and warming drinks were widespread, available to many. Others believe they were exceptional indulgences, remembered precisely because they were unusual. The discussion reminds us that comfort itself was unevenly distributed. Imagine yourself in this chamber. You sit near the hearth as a servant pours mulled wine into your cup. Cinnamon and cloves perfume the air, softening the scent of smoke and damp wool. You sip slowly, feeling warmth unfold through your chest. Your eyelids grow heavy. Your muscles relax. When you finally climb into bed, the blankets feel less suffocating and more welcoming. At your feet, a cloth-wrapped stone gives off a gentle heat. For once, you do not fear the night. The sensations are vivid, the sweet sharpness of spiced wine, the crackle of a log collapsing into embers, the subtle heat of warmed stone against cold skin. You drift into sleep with your senses soothed, your body persuaded, if only briefly, that comfort is within reach. Yet the truth remains. These luxuries were temporary. Heat diminished quickly. Drinks cooled. By midnight the room was cold once more. What these rituals provided was not lasting protection, but a kind of mental mercy, moments of ease that made the long chill bearable. So as you rest tonight, consider how deeply medieval people longed for warmth. They designed clever tools, embraced fleeting pleasures, and turned even a simple drink into a means of survival. Their nights were not effortless, but they were inventive. Every bath, every heated stone, every cup of ale was a quiet act of resistance against the cold. Even after baths, warm stones, or spiced drinks, medieval people did not rely solely on physical solutions. Cold was not only a bodily threat, it was also spiritual and supernatural. Night itself carried danger. The air was suspected of harboring illness and unseen forces. And so, people adopted charms, rituals, and superstitions to guard their sleep. A commonly recorded custom involved hanging amulets above the bed. These might be small wooden crosses, relics believed to hold saintly power, or bundles of herbs tied in cloth. Rue, mugwort, and juniper were favored plants, thought to repel evil spirits and the night air believed to spread disease. Imagine lying beneath a canopy decorated with fragrant bundles, their scent mixing with smoke from the hearth and the woolen smell of blankets. Prayers formed another barrier. Monastic traditions encouraged reciting psalms before sleep, and noble households often repeated paternosters or Ave Marias at the bedside. Even peasants murmured charms, part prayer, part incantation, as they crossed themselves against frost or fever. Some whispered verses over children, pressing kisses to their brows to ward off the night hag, a shadowy figure blamed for suffocating sleepers. A detail from a 15th-century German household guide advises placing iron objects, such as a knife or scissors, beneath the bed or pillow. Iron was believed to repel demons and fairies thought to slip indoors during the darkest hours. The faint glimmer of metal in the firelight became a silent protector against invisible threats. Other rituals connected directly to warmth. One folk belief claimed that turning your shoes upside down beside the bed would prevent frost from biting your toes. Another suggested that whispering the names of 3 saints before extinguishing the candle would keep your body heat from escaping in the night. To modern ears, these may sound like harmless superstitions. To medieval minds, they were as necessary as an additional blanket. Scholars still disagree about how deeply these practices were believed. Some argue that charms and prayers were sincere expressions of faith woven into daily life. Others think they were habitual gestures, repeated out of tradition whether fully trusted or not. Regardless, the rituals reveal a central truth. Sleep was fragile. It was a moment of exposure when cold, sickness, or spirits might strike. Physical and spiritual safeguards worked side by side. Now picture yourself in that medieval bed. Curtains are drawn. The fire has burned low. Shadows stretch across the chamber walls. Above you hangs a sprig of juniper, its sharp fragrance cutting through the smoky air. Beneath your pillow rests a small iron blade, hidden but reassuring. You whisper a quiet prayer, steady and rhythmic, then cross yourself before pulling the blankets closer. The darkness feels less threatening, as if these rituals have traced a circle of protection around your vulnerable form. The sensory impressions deepen, the cool linen against your skin, the faint glow of embers flickering across stone walls, the scent of herbs drifting softly overhead. Outside, wind brushes against the shutters. Inside, breath rises in small clouds. The night remains cold and uncertain, but within this carefully prepared space, you surrender to sleep, guarded by fire, faith, and the fragile comforts of human ingenuity. The soft rustle of herbs brushing the canopy, the faint metallic scent of iron near your head, the warmth of wool against your skin, and the lingering echo of whispered words. In that moment, faith, superstition, and survival were closely linked. Peasants followed similar customs, though with simpler materials. Instead of relics, they hung rough charms, carved wooden figures, knotted cords, or plain herbs gathered from nearby fields. Parents placed garlic beneath children's pillows, convinced it could protect them from illness and harmful spirits. Even animals were part of these practices. Cows and sheep in byres were sometimes blessed before nightfall, their presence believed to strengthen the household against frost. Across every social class, the cold night was faced not only with cloth and fire, but also with ritual. The medieval mindset sought warmth for the body and protection from unseen forces. To sleep meant stepping into uncertainty, where prayer and herb, iron and flame worked together against the long darkness. So when you settle into bed tonight, picture those small gestures, the turned shoes, the sprig of rosemary, the whispered saint's name. They were modest comforts, yet meaningful despite being intangible. For the medieval sleeper, survival was never only physical. It was also a form of spiritual armor, shaped from faith, habit, and hope. Step away from the bed and consider the chamber as a whole. Beyond blankets, animals, or charms, the structure of a room determined how well its occupants endured the night. Castles were originally built for defense, but over time builders tested ways to make interiors more livable. The outcome was a mix of features, some practical, some symbolic, designed to draw warmth from stone walls. One important feature was the solar, a private chamber usually reserved for the lord and his family. Unlike the vast great hall, the solar was smaller, located higher in the building, and easier to heat. It often included its own fireplace, thick wall hangings, and windows positioned toward the sun. This was not luxury in a modern sense. It was a practical decision. By reducing the size of the space, the heat from the fire had a better chance of remaining inside. Tapestries served more than decorative purposes. Woven from wool or silk, they covered walls with color and stories, saints, hunts, mythical beasts, while also acting as insulation. A single tapestry could stretch 10 or 20 feet wide, heavy enough that servants struggled to hang it. Behind it, damp stone was concealed, and the air near the wall became slightly less cold. If you stood close, you might notice the lanolin scent of wool, earthy and faintly reassuring. Archaeological studies suggest many chambers also included wooden paneling for similar reasons. Oak boards created a barrier, trapping pockets of air and reducing the cave-like feeling of stone interiors. Servants filled cracks with tow, moss, or rags to block drafts. The results were imperfect, yet they reveal the effort made to turn harsh fortresses into functional homes. Estate records reveal another detail. Nobles frequently transported their finest tapestries from one castle to another, treating them like portable walls. These textiles were not merely artwork. They were essential equipment. A lord traveling without his hangings was comparable to a soldier without protection. Scholars of medieval domestic life continue to debate how effective these architectural measures truly were. Some argue they significantly reduced drafts and preserved warmth. Others suggest the psychological comfort was more influential than the physical change. Entering a chamber lined with vivid cloth and lit by firelight could create the impression of warmth, even if the temperature remained nearly the same. This discussion highlights the close connection between perception and endurance. Now imagine stepping into such a chamber. The door shuts behind you, softening the wind's sound from the corridor. The walls are covered in crimson and gold tapestries, their woven scenes partly illuminated by candlelight. A fire burns in a carved stone hearth, smoke rising upward. Above, the timber ceiling feels lower than in the great hall, making the space more contained. It remains cold, you can still see your breath, but it feels less severe than the open halls below. The sensations combine: the coarse texture of tapestry under your hand, the subtle scent of wool mixed with smoke, the sound of wood cracking in the fire. The room gives the impression of refuge, though the cold persists beyond the fabric layers. Peasants adopted similar strategies in simpler ways. Instead of fine tapestries, they plastered or wattle-lined their walls and hung coarse wool or patched cloth to limit drafts. Brightly painted fabric with basic patterns served both decorative and insulating purposes. In their own manner, peasants transformed bare walls into protective layers, reducing open space into something more manageable. Another practical decision involved placing sleeping areas on upper floors. Heat rising from the great hall below provided at least a slight benefit. Children often slept in lofts above kitchens, where warmth from ovens lingered. The arrangement focused less on privacy and more on capturing every available degree of heat. Despite all these measures, the cold never disappeared. It could be reduced but never fully removed. Still, the existence of wall hangings, solar chambers, and wooden panels demonstrates the strong desire to convert stone strongholds into livable spaces. As you prepare to rest tonight, imagine those rooms illuminated by firelight, softened by wooden boards and bright cloth. They would not meet modern standards of comfort, yet they represented deliberate resistance. Against stone, frost, and the prolonged winter night, the medieval household built layers, architectural, artistic, and psychological, to declare, "This space belongs to us, and here we will endure." Close your eyes and consider the smell of a medieval bedroom. It was not the light lavender scent promoted in modern linen advertisements. Instead, it was a dense mixture of odors present from the moment you entered through the heavy wooden door. To understand how people slept, you must understand what they smelled, because each breath reflected their living conditions. The most constant scent was smoke. Fires burned almost continuously during winter, and without effective chimneys, soot drifted back into the room. Walls darkened, air thickened, and the smell settled into blankets and curtains. Even freshly washed linen quickly carried the sharp trace of ash. At night, smoke clung to hair, clothing, and skin. Then there was the smell of damp wool. Blankets, cloaks, and garments were rarely fully dry in winter. Moisture seeped through stone walls, gathered on surfaces, and absorbed into textiles. Wool retains that damp scent, earthy, lanolin-rich, slightly sour. Pulling the covers close meant breathing in fabric that felt warm but never entirely clean. Added to this was the odor of straw and rushes. Floors were layered with them, beds filled with them, and cleanliness was difficult to maintain. Trampled by boots, stained by spills, and disturbed by mice, rushes became musty quickly. Straw mattresses first released a grassy aroma, but after weeks of use they carried hints of sweat and decay. Each movement in bed sent another faint cloud of that scent into the air. A 14th-century household manual suggested scattering dried herbs, rosemary, lavender, or meadowsweet, over rushes to freshen the chamber. For a short time, the method helped. The herbal fragrance blended with heavier odors, masking them enough to create a sense of order. Yet the herbs soon dried and crumbled beneath footsteps, their scent fading, while the mustiness of old rushes returned. Hygiene was limited, baths were rare, and sweat was constant. People slept in layers of clothing that held the odor of the day. Leather, wool, and wash skin. Beds shared by families or companions intensified this effect. Breathing the air of a medieval chamber meant taking in the scent of other bodies, sometimes reassuring, sometimes overwhelming. Scholars still debate how strong these smells truly were. Some suggest that medieval people, used to constant exposure, barely noticed them. Others argue that contemporaries were fully aware, which explains their high regard for herbs, perfumes, and incense. Evidence from household inventories and medical writings supports the latter view. People complained about foul air, looked for remedies, and actively tried to improve it. The debate itself shows that smell was not secondary. It stood at the center of the medieval experience of sleep. Now place yourself in such a room. The fire has burned low, leaving only the sharp trace of smoke. The damp wool blanket scratches your chin. Straw beneath you releases a stale breath each time you move. The rushes on the floor rustle softly as mice search for crumbs. Your companion beside you exhales, warm yet heavy with sweat and ale. Above everything lingers a faint hint of rosemary scattered days ago, now barely covering the mixture of odors. The sensory reality is intense. It fills your nose and lungs, settling into memory. You cough, shift the covers, and try to breathe lightly until sleep arrives. This was normal. This was daily life. Peasants experienced the same conditions, though often on a smaller scale. Their cottages carried the smell of livestock, since animals frequently shared the same building. Cows, sheep, and chickens added their own scent, creating a strong mixture that city visitors found difficult, but villagers accepted as necessary for survival. Even here, herbs were used. Bundles of mint or chamomile might hang from rafters, partly for fragrance and partly to deter pests. For nobles, perfumes and incense sometimes improved the air. Incense burned in braziers added sweetness, though it mixed unevenly with smoke and dampness. Perfumed oils applied to clothing or linens created small areas of pleasant scent within a heavy atmosphere. Yet even the wealthiest chamber could not avoid the basic odor of medieval life. So when you imagine sleeping in a castle, do not picture crisp sheets and fresh air. Picture instead a blend of smoke, damp wool, straw, sweat, herbs, and animals. Every night, every breath reminded you of your surroundings and your endurance. Smell was as much a part of medieval sleep as blankets or fire. Over time, the familiarity of these odors may even have offered comfort. To breathe smoke and wool and straw was to breathe home. For the medieval sleeper, scent was not only inconvenience. It was identity woven into every night's rest. After smoke, damp wool, and musty straw, another factor helped people survive the night: food and drink. Supper may not seem connected to sleep, but what you ate before bed and the warmth it provided inside your body mattered as much as any covering. In winter, households relied on hearty pottages, thick stews of barley, peas, and root vegetables simmered slowly in large cauldrons. These meals settled heavily in the body, making the cold easier to tolerate. The heat of the broth remained in the stomach, spreading outward, helping you endure a freezing chamber a little longer. A noble household might enrich the dish with meat, spices, or cream, while peasants depended on onions, cabbage, and whatever scraps were available. A note in a 15th-century English manuscript advises eating leeks at night because they warm the belly and drive away the chill of death. Whether or not this claim was accurate, it shows how strongly people connected diet with warmth and survival. A hot meal was not merely nourishment. It was insulation from within. Drinks were equally important. Ale was the most common, consumed by rich and poor alike. Served warm in winter, it filled the stomach with calories and offered liquid comfort. Spiced wine, or hippocras, became a noble favorite, gently heated and seasoned with cinnamon, ginger, and cloves imported from distant lands. Imagine sipping such a drink in a smoky chamber, the aroma of spices blending with wool and ash, the sweetness warming your throat, leaving you relaxed and drowsy. There is even a record from the court of Charles VI of France, where the king's physician recommended hot mead at night to prevent chill from reaching the bones. The idea resembles our modern habit of drinking tea before sleep, though medieval science explained it through humoral theory, the belief that warm, moist drinks balanced the body's internal fluids. Scholars continue to debate how much alcohol truly provided warmth versus simply creating the impression of it. Some argue that ale and wine reduced perception, leading sleepers to feel warmer than they were. Others note the real caloric value of these drinks, which did supply energy through long, cold nights. The truth likely lies between these views, combining physical warmth with psychological comfort. Now imagine preparing for bed. A servant hands you a wooden cup of mulled wine. Steam rises, carrying waves of spiced fragrance. You drink, the liquid warming as it moves down your throat. Your body eases, muscles relaxing, eyelids growing heavy. When you finally climb into bed, the blankets seem less burdensome and more welcoming, as if warmth already resides within you. For peasants, the ritual was simpler but just as meaningful. A bowl of hot porridge thickened with oats or barley filled the stomach. Families gathered around the fire to eat, their faces lit by the glow, their bodies strengthened for the long night ahead. Children scraped the last bits from wooden spoons before curling beneath blankets. The memory of warmth from food helped them overlook drafts slipping through shutters. A common folk belief held that garlic eaten before bed prevented frostbite. Whether garlic truly improved circulation or simply felt warming to the palate, the practice endured. Farmers in colder regions sometimes chewed cloves before lying down, the sharp scent filling the chamber as strongly as smoke or wool. The sensory world of medieval bedtime meals was vivid: the bubbling cauldron, the quiet hiss of wine heating over the fire, the smell of herbs and spices mixing with damp rushes, the solid weight of stew in the stomach. Every flavor played a role in resisting the cold. When you think of medieval sleep, do not separate it from the supper that came first. Food was fuel, warmth, and even medicine. Without it, the cold felt harsher, the blankets thinner, the night longer. With it, the body endured. Every spoonful, every swallow, became another layer of protection, an inner blanket, unseen yet essential, against the freezing stone walls around you. Consider now the most vulnerable people inside a medieval castle: children and the elderly. Their bodies, less resistant to cold, often suffered most during winter. If a healthy adult knight or servant shivered through the night, a child might wake with blue lips, and an older woman might not wake at all. Survival for these groups required additional care, shared support, and sometimes simple fortune. Household records from noble families show that children rarely had private chambers. Instead, they slept in nurseries near the warmth of kitchens or together with servants. Young pages and squires in training often bunked in crowded rooms, their evening chatter fading beneath blankets. The reasoning was practical and clear. More bodies meant greater warmth. Infants in particular were wrapped in multiple layers of linen and wool. A cradle was placed near the hearth, or in some cases directly in the mother's bed, where her body heat shielded the child from the freezing air. One detailed account from a 14th-century chronicle describes a noble infant laid beside the fire in a wicker crib, wrapped in furs and protected by a canopy. The description highlights the extent of care families took to safeguard their youngest members. Even so, sickness and cold claimed many lives. Medieval parents lived with the constant worry that winter might take a child during the night. The elderly faced similar dangers. Frail bodies generated less warmth and endured fewer drafts. In peasant cottages, grandparents usually slept closest to the hearth, while younger adults accepted colder spaces. In castles, older relatives were often assigned smaller chambers or moved into kitchens during the harshest months. A letter from Burgundy recounts an elderly matron who insisted on sleeping in the bakehouse, claiming the oven's remaining heat restored her strength. Medical texts from the period frequently advised special precautions for both the young and the old. Physicians recommended heated stones wrapped in cloth placed at their feet or warm drinks intended to strengthen the humors. They warned that sudden chills could extinguish the flame of life, underscoring how vulnerable these groups were. Historians continue to debate whether medieval families treated children and elders with particular indulgence or simply included them in shared survival strategies. Some suggest the focus on protecting them reflects genuine compassion. Others point to high mortality rates, arguing that families had limited means to change outcomes. The tension between care and inevitability shaped attitudes toward childhood and old age. Now consider a winter night in a peasant cottage. A baby lies tightly swaddled, only a small portion of his face visible. A grandmother rests near the hearth, embers casting a faint red glow across her cheeks. Parents spread cloaks over both, ensuring they occupy the warmest spaces. Children gather together on a straw mattress, their quiet laughter fading as sleep overtakes them. The room smells of porridge, smoke, and wool, yet the warmth of shared presence endures. In a castle, the setting differs but carries similar concerns. A nurse rocks a cradle near the fire while a child stirs against the cold. Upstairs, an elderly noblewoman asks that her bed curtains be drawn tightly as a servant places heated stones at her feet. She whispers prayers, rosary in hand, aware of the season's risks. In both settings, the youngest and oldest demand the greatest care, and even that attention does not always guarantee safety. The sensory elements are clear. Logs crackle as they are added to the fire, swaddling cloth rustles softly, blankets shift as an old man adjusts beneath them. The air itself seems fragile, as if the cold waits for weakness. Medieval sleep was not equal for everyone. Children and elders bore the greatest risks, their survival dependent on the warmth others provided. During those long nights, every blanket, ember, and whispered prayer held importance. Sleep was not only about individual endurance but about community, with the young and old sustained through winter by shared vigilance. Cold influenced more than skin and bone. It shaped ideas about health. To the medieval mind, chill was not merely uncomfortable, it was hazardous, capable of disturbing the body's internal balance and inviting illness. Medical thought centered on the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and physicians believed temperature played a key role in maintaining harmony among them. Excessive cold, they argued, caused the humors to thicken, obstructing the body and leading to disease. Medical treatises from the 13th and 14th centuries offered detailed guidance for combating this danger at night. One manual advised rubbing feet with warm oil before bed to open the pores and release harmful chill. Another suggested drinking heated milk with honey, claiming it soothed digestion and prevented the humors from becoming sluggish. Physicians regarded warmth as a form of medicine, prescribing it through food, drink, clothing, and even proximity to others. A French surgeon recorded that sleeping in damp chambers could produce melancholy by chilling the black bile. He recommended hanging tapestries not for decoration but for health. Climate and medicine were closely linked in this worldview. At the same time, folk remedies were common. Some believed rubbing garlic or onion on the soles of the feet before sleep prevented cold from entering the body. Others tied wool charms soaked in wine around their wrists. An English herbal even advised keeping a live rooster in the bedroom to draw frost away from a person. Whether such advice was widely followed is uncertain, but it demonstrates how strongly people sought protection. Modern scholars continue to debate the effectiveness of medieval cold remedies. Some argue that warm oils, heated drinks, and herbal treatments offered limited relief by encouraging circulation and providing psychological comfort. Others maintain that most practices were largely symbolic, offering minimal practical benefit. Regardless of the outcome, belief in these nightly routines was sincere and widespread. Imagine preparing for bed under this guidance. You sit by the hearth as warm oil is massaged into your feet, the scent of rosemary filling the room. You drink a small cup of heated wine sweetened with honey and feel its warmth spread through your throat. A sprig of garlic rests near the bed, sharp in the air, intended to block frost. You climb beneath the covers, confident these measures will preserve balance until morning. The sensations are distinct: the warmth of oil on skin, the sweetness of honeyed wine, the sharp smell of garlic nearby. Sleep becomes more than rest. It becomes a medical routine, a nightly effort to prevent imbalance. Peasants maintained their own remedies. Women brewed nettle or chamomile teas for children, believing warmth prevented coughs. Men wrapped their legs in wool soaked in vinegar to support circulation. In cottages, these customs blurred the boundary between observation and belief, yet they provided a sense of control in a world where illness often seemed unavoidable. Ironically, some ailments arose from the very strategies meant to fight the cold. Fires filled rooms with smoke, heavy bedding aggravated joints, and oily ointments gathered dirt. Still, these drawbacks appeared minor compared to the threat of frost entering the body. A smoky room seemed preferable to a freezing one. When considering medieval sleep, it was not simply endurance of discomfort. It was shaped by medical theories, remedies both practical and unusual, and an ongoing concern that cold might upset the balance of life. Each night functioned as a medical event. Every blanket and herb acted as a prescription, every ember as treatment. To fall asleep was to trust that these measures would be sufficient until dawn. Even with fires, coverings, herbs, and charms, there were nights when they proved insufficient. Step into a castle chamber at the height of winter, and you might witness something unsettling: frost spreading across the inside walls. Imagine lying in bed and noticing a fine pattern of ice tracing the stone, or waking to discover your wash basin frozen solid, the water turned into a clear block. The cold did not remain outside. It entered freely, marking rooms with its harsh design. Chroniclers describe mornings when entire households found frost on their bed curtains. One noblewoman wrote that her canopy shimmered as if stitched with silver, meaning the moisture from her breath had frozen overnight. To modern ears it sounds poetic. For her, it was evidence of how uncomfortable even a well-furnished chamber could be. Archaeological findings support these written accounts. In some preserved castles, faint salt lines and moisture marks reveal how water once condensed on walls and floors. Without insulation, warm indoor air met freezing stone, and frost formed quickly. Servants scraped away ice each morning, only for it to return the following night. A record from Scandinavia notes that in certain halls, icicles formed indoors along the rafters, dripping onto those sleeping below. Cloths were hung to catch the meltwater, a simple response to a troubling issue. Imagine falling asleep and hearing the slight crack of ice above, uncertain whether a fragment might drop onto your bed. Historians continue to debate how widespread this was. Some suggest indoor frost was common mainly in northern Europe, where winters were severe. Others argue that even in milder regions, poorly heated stone rooms could easily reach freezing temperatures. Both views likely hold truth. Conditions differed by region, but the possibility of waking to ice inside one's chamber was never remote. Now picture yourself there. Dawn arrives in a dim gray light, and your breath clouds the air. The bed curtains are stiff, edged with frozen crystals. When you reach for the basin, your fingers meet ice rather than water. Your joints feel stiff from the cold, and leaving the blanket seems like a penalty. The sensations are sharp, frozen fabric against skin, the brittle creak of wood tightened by frost, and silence interrupted only by the faint drip of melting ice. Peasants faced similar challenges, though in other forms. In cottages, frost-coated thatch and rafters, sometimes falling like light snow during the night. Children could wake with ice clinging to their hair. Parents joked about sleeping beneath indoor clouds, but humor did little to reduce the hardship. Frostbite, chilblains, and breathing illnesses often followed. Nobles, despite wealth and status, could not completely avoid the problem. Heated stones and heavy furs protected the body, yet the surrounding air remained unforgiving. Diaries reveal the mental strain as well. People described dreading the moment they had to rise, feeling confined to their beds because the room beyond was too cold to face. An English poet even used the image as metaphor, describing love as a bed without frost inside the hangings. For him, true closeness meant creating warmth where the world offered only cold. This shows how deeply frost shaped both imagination and daily life. So when considering medieval sleep, remember the unusual sight of ice decorating interior walls. Living in a castle meant sharing your chamber with frost. Waking each morning reminded that stone and winter worked together against comfort. Yet people persisted, removing ice, layering blankets, offering prayers, and confronting mornings that felt as harsh indoors as outside. Now imagine not a castle, but the open road, far from familiar surroundings. Medieval travel was slow, demanding, and risky. When night arrived, the challenge of staying warm intensified. Castles had fireplaces and tapestries. Peasants had family hearths. Travelers, pilgrims, merchants, wandering knights, relied on whatever shelter they could find, most often inns. The medieval inn was rarely the charming image one might picture today. Typically, it was a timber building with a smoky hall, crowded quarters, and shared beds. 3 or 4 guests might occupy a single mattress, blankets stretched thin, privacy absent. Yet inns provided one essential element: heat. The central fire burned for all, and close quarters increased warmth. A traveler in 15th century Italy complained about vermin in the beds but admitted that at least the presence of others kept him from freezing. Imagine lying on a straw mattress beside 2 strangers, the smell of ale and sweat in the air. Uncomfortable, certainly, but sufficient to preserve warmth through the night. Some accommodations were even more unusual. In poorly equipped inns, guests sometimes slept in stables. Though this seems degrading, many preferred it. Horses and cattle generated steady heat, and a stable full of animals could feel warmer than a drafty upper room. Pilgrims traveling the Camino de Santiago wrote of deliberately choosing stalls, resting against hay bales beside livestock. The odor was strong, yet the warmth was reliable. In rural regions, older customs of hospitality remained. Villagers were often expected to welcome travelers, especially pilgrims or those bearing religious symbols. A peasant household might offer space near the fire or a place on a straw pallet. Warmth came not from luxury, but from closeness and goodwill. You would sleep shoulder to shoulder with unfamiliar faces, listening to the crackle of a modest hearth, the scent of stew lingering overhead. A 14th century record from a French town describes communal inns with long wooden platforms covered in straw, where dozens of travelers lay side by side, men and women together. What might seem uncomfortable today was normal then. Shared heat outweighed social unease. Scholars debate whether such inns were, In some ways, warmer than castles. Some argue yes, though crowded and unhygienic, smaller spaces retained heat better than vast stone chambers. Others point to risks, lice, fleas, theft, and suggest that castle life, despite its cold, offered greater security. Both arguments carry weight. For the medieval traveler, survival often meant choosing between isolated cold and crowded discomfort. Imagine entering one of these inns. Voices and fire greet you at the door. The air smells of ale, smoke, and roasted meat. A space is made on a straw pallet, and you settle beside strangers. The floor creaks, dogs bark, mugs strike tables, yet the warmth of the gathering eases your body. Later, as conversation fades and snores replace laughter, you feel the steady heat of those around you and see embers glowing in the hearth. It is not luxury, but it is sufficient. The details remain vivid, straw pressing through thin fabric, the heavy scent of sweat and smoke, the rhythm of many sleepers breathing in unison. You adjust carefully, mindful of your neighbor, until the low murmur of the inn carries you into a light but necessary rest. Even nobles encountered these conditions while traveling. Royal journeys required large retinues, and inns filled quickly. Records note monarchs staying in monasteries or occupying entire homes to house their attendants. Yet even kings faced the same basic limitation. Warmth was limited, and life on the road reduced the comfort of rank. Within the broader story of medieval sleep, the traveler holds a distinct place. Each night brought uncertainty, and every bed was a matter of endurance rather than ease. Would it be a flea-ridden pallet, a stable beside horses, the floor of a stranger's cottage, or, if luck allowed, a monastery guest hall? Wherever it might be, the objective stayed the same: to hold enough warmth to witness another dawn. Each household developed its own methods to endure, yet not all prevailed. The medieval world left behind accounts, part history, part legend, of nights so severe they turned into warnings for future generations. To sleep in a castle was to confront an unseen enemy, and at times that enemy was the cold itself. A stark chronicle from the 13th century recounts guards stationed on a castle wall in Flanders who froze during a harsh winter siege. By morning, their fellow soldiers found them still standing, spears in hand, bodies rigid with ice. The writer recorded it not as sorrow, but as evidence of winter's severity, as if the cold were another weapon in battle. Picture the unsettling image: men turned into statues overnight, their watchfires long extinguished. There were gentler, more personal stories as well. A letter from a noblewoman in Burgundy describes how her cousin, visiting from Italy, shivered through the entire night and pleaded for sunrise, having never experienced such frost. He survived, yet the story was retold with amusement, teasing him for fragility while quietly admitting the fear of a night that felt without end. A Nordic folk tale tells of a bride who entered her husband's castle and collapsed from the shock of its freezing chamber. Villagers murmured that ice spirits had cursed her. Whether illness or exposure caused her death, the account endured as a warning. Even noble unions could be strained by stone walls and winter winds. Historians still debate how literally these stories should be read. Were they dramatized, turning routine hardship into legend? Or do they reflect genuine losses to frostbite and hypothermia in an era without insulation? Some scholars argue chroniclers amplified events to teach moral lessons, while others believe they recorded a climate harsher than today's. The truth may lie between exaggeration and lived experience. Imagine hearing such accounts in a great hall. The fire burns low, shadows moving across the walls, and an elderly retainer recounts a knight who died in his sleep after relying on too few blankets. Children listen closely, gripping their cloaks. These narratives were not only for storytelling, they carried instruction. Treat the cold with respect, or face the consequences. Travelers' writings often shared the same cautionary tone. Pilgrims recorded companions lost on mountain passes, their bodies discovered in spring, curled as though asleep. Soldiers described fellow fighters who never rose from their bedrolls, cloaks hardened by frost. When temperatures fell, the boundary between sleep and death narrowed dangerously. The physical sensations of such nights were severe. Frost biting exposed skin. Numbness spreading through fingers and toes. the unease of closing your eyes uncertain of waking again. To lie down in an icy chamber was a risk. Blankets, embers, and prayers formed the wager. Survival was the reward. Yet alongside grim accounts were stories of endurance. Peasants spoke with pride of winters survived in small cottages where closeness and fire preserved life. Nobles marked midwinter hunts and feasts as proof their resources overcame the season. For every report of loss, another voice affirmed resilience, presenting survival itself as triumph. Perhaps this explains why legends of frozen nights endured. They reminded listeners that castles, despite their strength, were not immune. Stone walls could repel armies, but not winter. During long, dark hours, even the most powerful lord relied on blankets, flames, and companionship, much like the humblest peasant. So when considering medieval sleep, hold both realities together, the accounts of those claimed by frost and the quiet victories of those who persisted. Each story carried a lesson. Respect the night. Guard against the cold. Never assume survival was certain. At last, return to the hearth, the center that sustained every medieval sleeper. Fire was never merely a tool, it was the core of the household, the dividing line between life and death on winter nights. Its glow cast shifting shadows along the walls, moving as the flames rose and fell. To sleep in a castle meant living in constant negotiation with fire. You feared it, depended on it, and could not live without it. The hearth shaped every sense. The crack of oak logs echoed through the chamber. Sparks rose briefly before fading into the chimney. The scent of resin clung to fabric and hair. Heat spread unevenly, warming your face while your back remained cold. The hearth was both protector and burden, provider and smoky master. For nobles, a strong fire symbolized status. A blazing hearth showed wealth, the ability to command servants to gather ample fuel, even to clear forests if needed, to maintain flames throughout the night. Some estates appointed servants whose sole task was to keep embers alive. Allowing the hearth to fade was not just inconvenient, it suggested failure. Among the poor, reverence for fire was equally strong. Peasants sat on earthen floors, gathered with family and animals, watching flames consume rough-cut logs. They shared stories, prayers, and simple meals. Though their hearths lacked carved stone grandeur, the comfort was genuine. In castle and cottage alike, fire united people and made rest achievable. A traveler in Germany once described villagers standing around the hearth before bed, stretching their hands toward it and whispering blessings, as though the flames themselves were sacred. They believed the fire carried their intentions into the darkness, guarding them while they slept. Practical need blended seamlessly with ritual. Fire offered warmth, but also memory and belief. Modern historians debate whether this reverence was practical or symbolic. Some see it as survival instinct expressed through tradition. Others view fire as deeply spiritual, woven into worldview and prayer. Both interpretations may be valid. Living so close to danger, medieval people naturally gave fire meaning beyond its function. Now imagine your castle one final time. Bed curtains drawn, blankets layered high. Outside, wind strikes the towers, snow brushing against shutters. Night presses heavily. Yet in the main hearth, embers continue to glow, their faint light filtering through the fabric. You close your eyes, hearing the steady murmur of flames, aware they stand between you and frost. The experience settles around you, smoke lingering on your tongue, the weight of wool and fur, the warmth of a dog at your feet, a quiet prayer repeating in your thoughts. Sleep in the Middle Ages was neither simple nor assured. It demanded effort, every method, every ritual, every remaining source of warmth. Ultimately, castles defended against human enemies, but not against winter. What preserved their inhabitants was not stone or iron, but resilience, adaptation, and shared effort. Surviving the night required layered blankets, shared body heat, steady fuel, and enduring hope. Against the persistent cold of the medieval night, humanity itself became the sustaining flame. Imagine the embers glowing softly, their light no longer intense but calm, like coals settling after long work. The chamber is still, and the wind beyond the walls fades into a distant hum. You feel the weight of the blankets, thick and protective, pressing you gently into the mattress. The battle against the cold, the careful tending of fires, the sounds of dogs and servants, all of it withdraws, as if a curtain has been drawn across the world. Your breathing becomes steady. Each inhale carries a faint trace of smoke and wool. Each exhale moves quietly into the silent room. The noises that once echoed, boots on stone floors, shutters shaking, monks chanting, now remain only as softened memories. The castle itself seems at rest, its stone walls holding silence like a quiet assurance. Picture yourself secure within this shelter. The dog at your feet sighs and shifts slightly. The final candle flickers out, and darkness settles around you like another layer of covering. The cold still exists, but you no longer resist it. You accept it as those before you did, understanding that sleep is a delicate agreement with the night. As darkness deepens, your body feels heavier. Thoughts fade into simple shapes and muted colors. The medieval world, with its smoke-filled air and winter chill, drifts farther away, like frost disappearing under morning light. What remains is calm. You are warm enough, safe enough, tired enough. And so the story comes to an end. The hearth glows faintly, the bed supports you, and the long night carries you steadily into dreams. Rest now as they once did, wrapped in quiet endurance. Sweet dreams.